Welcome to the HoCo Cyber Collective Podcast, where community, technology, and stories converge.
Hey everyone, thanks again for joining us in another episode of the HoCo Cyber Collective Podcast. Again, this is Colin Hamill, and I have the pleasure of speaking to a friend and mentor, Jason Taule from the MIC, their CISO in residence. Jason, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here, Colin. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for joining us in the virtual studio. So, I guess the first thing I want to know is tell us the story almost of how you found yourself to be here. How did you tell us the story of Jason?
Wow.
A nice simple question.
Yeah, I didn't pick my career. My career picked me. And I want to thank everybody I've worked with and for. I would not be as successful as I am had I not had the distinct pleasure of working with and for some amazing people and some amazing teams. Cyber is a super hot topic of late. You go to a cocktail reception and people ask, what do you do? And I say cyber, and no, it's not. It doesn't. Rarely does it look like the Army recruiting commercials, right? I mean, that's a very sexy environment, and occasionally you can get a little crazy like that, but typically it's much more mundane and much more boring. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. Whether that was, I got in trouble in 7th grade open space math class because we finished the book. And this is one of those, the teachers refused to believe that we had taught ourselves the material. They gave us the test and we passed it. So they gave us the 8th grade book and we taught ourselves the 8th grade book and we passed it. And they're like, what are we going to do with these kids? I know what'll slow them down. Let's give them a computer. And when I say computer, the first computer that I used, this is in 76, 77, something like that. No monitor, no keyboard. Right now, when I say that to my children, their heads snap off because they have no idea what I'm talking about. How could you possibly interact with this thing? It was a CPU and a disk reader, right? And we were using the crochet hooks to again, slow these kids down. They're working too fast. So we basically taught ourselves computers and basic and some of the things of that nature. So everywhere I went thereafter, I already had a leg up on it. So I find myself in undergraduate program. I live off campus and I want to remote in. So I say, hey, and this is pre-internet, right? This is just dial-up.
Yeah.
And I said, can I do this? They said, no. Why? If we give it to you, everybody will want it. Well, I wound up building the PC lab for the school's business, the business school's computer lab. It was the first one of its kind. They had mainframes before that. So now they've got this micro lab. And they need a sysadmin, and a sysadmin's got to be available to help out 24 hours a day. Well, guess what? I'm not coming on campus. If you want me to play that role, you got to give me. So I was the first person to remotely access William and Mary's computer systems. And all of a sudden, now you have to become aware of all of these skills. So I graduated. I went to work for Booz Allen in Hamilton. I was not immediately on a cyber project. The first project I was on actually was for the VA. The VA got promoted to cabinet level. People may not remember that of the current cabinets, not all of them were at that level. And there were a variety of requirements, OMBA 130 and other things like that. This federal agency had to comply with, and they didn't. So I helped build their very first, we didn't even call it cyber then, of course, we called it EDP or AIS or whatever it was, but I helped build their first information risk management and compliance program. So now I'm a cybersecurity expert because I've done one project, right? So they just put me on one project after another, and I had some amazing engagements. I did a job for NASA, helping them refine their existing cybersecurity program, and every place I went, I learned really important takeaway lessons. For example, if you build something and you're going to send it out to the edge of the solar system to capture information, you know what you don't do? You don't reboot that and patch it because you may just, waste billions of dollars in investment. So each of those things helped me in my journey. I left Booz. I built a consulting practice for one of the consulting firms and ran that for a number of years. I became one of the first CISOs when that happened towards the late 80s. And I will tell you that it's really been an interesting journey because early in my career, you could go to work like any new CISO, any new executive. You're going to come in 30, 60, 90 days. You're going to figure out the lay of the land. You're going to figure out where you are, where you need to be, and you can develop a plan to get wherever it is you need to be. I don't know that you can do that anymore. And I'm not just saying, I'm the CISO in residence at the Maryland Innovation Center. You mentioned the MIC before. For the members of your audience who don't necessarily know what that organization is or what it's about, our goal is to help small to medium-sized businesses overcome the obstacles to their success through mentorship and other guidance. So any company, as you know, regardless of their size, regardless of their industry, for them to succeed, they need two things. You need access to capital and you need access to customers. Well, those are both questions of confidence and trust, which is what we are all about in cyber, right? I'm not going to invest in you if I think that there's risk. I'm, as a customer, not going to do business with you if I don't think you're going to show me a level of respect and protect the data that I have to give you as part of that transaction.
Right.
So the challenge there is that many organizations either don't have the financial resources or the volume of work is so overwhelming that it just dramatically outweighs the ability for any organization to spend. As I mentioned, it used to be that I could articulate a plan and it might take 2 to 3 years to get there, but we would get to where we needed to be. I don't know that you can do that anymore. I think the end state is moving away from us more rapidly than any of us have the wherewithal to chase. So then the question becomes twofold. One, as the CISO and resident, I'm advising leaders, organizations, it's okay as a leader to accept risk. If you know about it and if you decide it's acceptable, it's never okay to accept risk by default because you lack awareness of its existence. And so when people say, well, what is a CISO? What is a chief information security officer? I think many of them think that the role is the defensive coordinator on an American football team, right? Keep the other team from scoring.
Right.
That's part of the job. However, that job, frankly, is becoming easier. Why? Well, because we have more capable vendors like you that with capable products that we can rely on. Organizations are increasingly looking to the cloud, and you can inherit some of the security controls from your cloud provider, or you have an MSSP that can provide those. Again, got to be able to be able to support the financial cost of doing those things, but it's something that you don't necessarily have to do yourself. But it's not just about keeping the other teams from scoring on you. You have to put some points on the board, right? You have a business purpose. You have an objective. You have a strategy. How are you going about that? How do you make technology decisions? So when I talk to some of the companies that we support and they don't have a full-time CISO, they don't have somebody whose job it is to inform that conversation. The question is, how do you make those technology decisions? Are you accepting risk? And more often than not, the answer is, yeah, they are unknowingly accepting risk. So that's really what this is about.
Right.
I got to the MIC because after spending almost 40 years in the career, I wanted to kind of give back. I had a very good fortune working a bunch of different organizations. I've had a few exits of my own. I was at two very large organizations. I was the inside CISO at a company by the name of General Dynamics. Their GDIT, their public health division. Same thing for Computer Sciences Corporation. They have very strong government presence, as you might imagine, as government contractors, but the government changed how they do business. Once upon a time, you got business based on best value. Then it became a low price, technically acceptable. And I'm not diminishing or disparaging any decisions anybody made in that regard. I'm simply describing what happened. And the difference is, once upon a time, there was not an expectation that government contractors had cyber programs of their own. And if the customer said, I want it and I'm willing to pay for it, you would build it. I was actually able to help generate revenue for the company. Well, now, no, I expect you. Look, what's driving this isn't just the bad guys, and we can talk about that if you wanted, about what they're after and why they hack, et cetera.
Right.
I'm sure you've had other podcasts go into that in depth. But there are drivers. Bottom line is you have to provide assurances to these other parties. You're a small to medium-sized business, some of whom are looking for investments from venture capitalists, or they're looking to have an exit. Well, investors don't want to buy risk. You've got regulators. The joke is in the Mid-Atlantic where we're based, the only employers are feds, eds, and meds. Great employers, but they have huge mandates in terms of, FERPA and HIPAA and FISMA and CMMC and these other serious program requirements that you have to meet in order to earn your customers' trust. We mentioned customers driving it. Another major driver is cyber insurance. if you don't have the financial wherewithal to put everything and address 100% of your risks, there's always going to be that residual risk. Well, I need to buy coverage to help me address those things, but I don't want to pay higher premiums than necessary. So if you invest in certain things, you can realize savings through reduced premiums. So with all of those things driving you, then the question becomes, what do you do? And that's really the conversations that we have.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's how I got into this. That's how I found myself at the MIC. Through there, we met, had a chance to have several conversations over the years. You've had quite a bit of success. I don't take any credit for your success other than being somebody that you bounce some crazy ideas off of every once in a while. I think all of your ideas were exceptionally well met. And, I'm happy to give an unabashed, unashamed plug for the kinds of technology that you bring to market. If you can't do everything that whatever framework you're beholden to would say, well, where do you focus your energies? If you don't have the financial resources to do anything, where do you focus your energy? In my opinion, the answer is you got to do two things. One, early detection, right? I got to find out as soon as possible, real time, if not near real time, what's happening. Is there something anomalous here? Is there bad activity going on? So that you can then respond in a quick and effective manner. So most of your audience will know that an incident response, one of the very first things that you do, if not the first thing, is containment, right? Keep this thing from spreading. It's no different than how you keep a live biological virus from spreading. You got to, avoid the spread of contagion. Well, if I can invest in obstructive technologies, if I can invest in honeypots and honey nets and things that aren't real, I can go have at it. Go ahead and spend as much time as you want in that fake sandbox because it's not my real data. I'm over here protecting you. I'm aware that you're here, so I can make even greater levels of protection. I've got that early detection of awareness, and I don't even need to invest a lot in response because, again, it's not real. So a big endorsement for that approach.
Well, and I definitely appreciate that. And actually, if I can share this real quick, let me share my screen. All right, can you see this? This should be very familiar to you.
The MITRE ATT&CK framework.
Yes. This is, again, for those who are listening, I want you to imagine a very, very complicated, very large, intimidating looking, chart on here. The one thing that I'll tell you, Jason, that I've always been blown away by is how depressingly few people actually know what the MITRE ATT&CK framework actually is. And I'm like, you do know that, the cybersecurity professionals have diligently documented literally every single effort that we've seen in the wild. And again, no one knows about it, which is, one of the frustrations that I have. But this is the demonstration of what I had is, people don't realize this. People think when I ask them, how long does a cyber attack take to fully execute? I've gotten answers as low as 5 nanoseconds. The answer is a little bit higher. It's on average, it's 4 to 6 months. Cybersecurity professionals like you know this, but most people, again, they think it's like the movies. There's a guy that looks obviously like me wearing a black hoodie, banging on a keyboard and breaking through with the hacks. It's actually, as you said, boring is a way that I would describe it. So in this little demo that I'm giving, this is what I show my customers. Again, our product is called Guard Tower. It's an early warning system, just like Jason described. So up here is a email where we'll see alerts that come through. Down here, we are pretending to be cyber attackers. We've both gone to the dark side, Jason. We get to, you know what? We're taking it back. And we have targeted a local MSP in this story. It's called the Cybersecurity team. We went to the dark web and we purchased their CISO's credentials. Very important things to get. Not only that, we even managed to corrupt their PC in their primary data center location. And again, in the early stages of the first thing that Jason and I need to do is we need to start scanning the network. What is on this data center that we could potentially use as part of our attack? So before I can even finish explaining what's going to happen, you'll see that Jason mentioned near real time. Our guard tower just lit up like a Christmas tree because fortunately the cybersecurity team invested in guard tower. And if we open this, we'll see that, dear guard tower user, so this would be sent to someone like you or whoever is advising them for security that an investigation worthy event has been identified on the network. this is the IP address of the machine that is responsible for that maligned activity. And you see, that's us. We have been caught. And I'll pause. Is this sort of what you were talking about?
Yeah, so I think a lot of organizations will recognize the function of a SOC, Security Operations Center, or a SIM, right, which is their big pane of glass that tells them what's happening. But they have those capabilities for their live, actual assets, data, resources. What you're talking about, you have intentionally created fake things, right? If someone's messing around with it and you get an alert, you know there's no legitimate, you don't have to even debate, is there a possible legitimate use
Exactly.
case here? You can immediately know that you're dealing with something that has that commands immediate response. So same kind of functionality, but much more meaningful in that you know 100% with 100% assurances that action needs to be taken.
Exactly. And that's the thing. We don't call this a breach. We know it might be a breach, but there's the possibility of a less, sinister motive. It could have just been some
Yeah.
new employee just was poking around the network. Maybe we just give them cybersecurity awareness training. Maybe
Yeah.
you fire them. That depends on whatever your security
Well,
policy.
it's inside, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. As somebody that's been doing this for 40 years, I think people think cyber has advanced over that 40 years. I'm here to say, unfortunately, I think that our overall posture has steadily declined during the 40 years that I've been doing this. Um, Back in the day, it was a mainframe. And for those unfamiliar with that big giant box and what it did,
Computer the
we
size of a house.
we secured data in two ways. You, the user, had to have certain rights, but you also had to have rights at the file level. So I don't care whether you're using CA Top Secret, RACF, or ACF2, those old timey tools. Right now, when you think of, I have access to a file share on a folder. I can, once I have access to that folder, I can get to everything inside of that folder. We don't do dual level authorization to file. So that was one of the first times I noticed a decline in our posture simply because of an advancement from a movement, and plenty of mainframes still around, but in a move towards the mid-range and the micro. I think over time, we've unfortunately been covering from a series of bright ideas that people have had, bright ideas that made our lives and our world better and enabled us to do things better, faster, cheaper. But not once did anybody think about the cyber consequences of that decision. So the very first thing we did is we basically gave everybody a mainframe, right? The PCs. I'm old enough to remember where it was usually the finance team, right? Because they had that killer use case for this app. So VisiCalc, the predecessor to Excel. I can remember financial departments running the company's financials on a PC using these spreadsheets. So the IT guys, and I say guys because in those days it was mostly men, thought it was a toy, and they said to the business, "Have fun with that toy, guys." Right? And very quickly, without the awareness of the IT folks, the finance and other business units started doing really important business critical needs, fulfilling their needs with these tools. But it wasn't being well managed because it was managed by people and run by people that didn't know anything about IT. What do you think happened the first time one of those hard drives crashed? Backing up my data? Oh, that's a great idea, IT guys. I wish you'd told me that about that before. So suddenly now the business said, okay, I need to turn this back to you. And we realized, okay, now there's this PC. Then we said, well, these peripherals, everybody needs printers. I'm not going to give everybody a printer. We're going to share them. I talked about Booz Allen as a place that I cut my teeth back in the day. In the late 80s, we had the world's largest 3Com network and the world's largest Apple Talk network because we had guys that wrote code and people that made pictures. And you can figure out which of those two computers systems you were on based on what your job was.
Right.
We didn't want to do, we used to win business, competitive business by saying in our proposals, in our response to, federal RFPs or whatever it was, we had one computer for every two people. Our nearest competitor was a 4-to-1 ratio. Now, if I said that to my kids, they would be like, well, what did the other people do all day? Right? How did you do anything without a computer? By today's standards, that's just an absurd statement. But if we didn't want to give everybody a computer, we certainly were going to incur the cost to give everybody printers and scanners and the others peripherals. So we tried to find a way to make that work. No. That was just a kludge munch. That was a mess. Then the next, and probably the most brilliant idea anybody ever had, right? Let's put all this stuff in an environment that nobody owns or has responsibility for. Voila, the internet. Now, we all know that Al Gore is responsible for the internet. If you have a breach, I don't think you're going to call Al up and say, hey, former Mr. Vice President, this is something for which you're responsible, right? I've met the man. He's not taking responsibility for this. Then what happens after that? Well, then we go to the cloud. Then we start with virtual technology. Now we got AI. I mean, you can see that each one of these advancements made things we can do more, faster, cheaper, et cetera. But the potential for risk, the potential for bad outcomes is just far outstripping our ability to cope and manage with those things. So
Right.
I think most people focus on these frameworks as saying, this is everything I need to do to be secure. Now, that's everything you need to do to be compliant. And I'm not saying don't look at a framework. Frameworks are important,
Right.
especially for small to medium-sized organizations, because when the inevitable happens and you have an event, you have to be able to answer certain questions. How did you decide that what you were doing was the right stuff? How did you decide that there was enough? Well, I don't know. Bob said it was okay. Who the
My
heck's
gut.
Right. But if you said, no, we aligned with this framework that came from NIST or GDPR or ISO, they have professionals. Their job is to say to organizations. Now, I want to come back to what you said about the MITRE ATT&CK framework. I think it's actually gaining a little more traction in ways that might or may not have been originally intended. When I get questions from board members, folks who are captains of industry, but these men and women typically don't have the technical acumen that you and I do, and they hear about something in the media, or they hear about, maybe they sit on another board and they come over here and they say, could what happened to that organization happen to us? And that's when they single out specific events. Ransomware. What are we doing about ransomware? Where I bet if we looked at that MITRE ATT&CK framework, there's one box or a drop down within one box of all those hundreds that calls out ransomware. So when I say to the organization, here's our response to that, but why are you limiting your concern and your focus to that one thing? So the control framework is one approach, maybe top down. If you look at it from the other side, bottoms up, what are all the ways that bad actors could find their way into our environment? Because remember, they only have to find one wormhole. I've got to find and protect and close them all. So that's where I think that has value. It's useful to look at your landscape, at your environment from both directions, particularly if you get those kinds of questions.
Correct. And the way that I've heard it described is left of boom, which is just the what I explain is that chart is a map. The way that there's been a lot of the term I like to call it is marketecture, where, just like when we have the cloud, I didn't know what the cloud was at first until I realized it was just a fancy marketing term for somebody else's computer you don't own.
That's exactly right. And anybody who tells you they're not using the cloud, if they have one computer and it's from Apple or Microsoft, they're using the cloud.
Yeah. And by the way, they turned it on without even
Right.
Actually, I'd like to share something that so we're doing testing of the guard tower stuff, and actually one of the interesting parts is that, one of the testing we discovered that Microsoft, if you're using Microsoft Defender and Microsoft Intune for your sort of antivirus and management platforms respectively, there was apparently a recent update where, did you know that any client that's running Microsoft Defender will periodically, once every day, scan the internal network to build a network map, is then uploaded to Intune so that information can be added. So you can find rogue devices that you didn't know about that are now in your. Did you know that was happening?
There are things that we were briefed on as far as capabilities that we do not allow to happen. My challenge is when vendors don't always disclose what those things are, and you don't know about it. That's the conversation I mentioned before. Is the CISO's role is to inform the conversation, and the CISO has to work with vendors to learn. I think what you're getting at is and I'm not singling Microsoft out. I want to look at the larger question about supply chain.
Right.
COVID kind of called attention to this really for the first time, but it wasn't about integrity. It was more about the ability of my supply chain to fulfill my needs. So, but it wasn't just COVID. In the healthcare sector, people may know that Asheville, North Carolina, suffered some rather devastating storms. I believe it was Helene. One of the unfortunate victims was Baxter. And they have a plant that made something like 60% of the country's IV supplies. One
Oh,
plant makes 60%. So all of the hospitals that were downstream of that upstream supplier would put on notice that for a period of time, you were only going to get about 50% of what you previously ordered. Well, think about that impact. That means you have to reserve your supply for your critical use cases. Maybe you can't do elective procedures. Hospitals are already challenged enough financially. Things like that really put a hurt on that organization. And that's one example of one thing in one industry. That's true of everybody. When I was at Booz Allen, when we used to do projects to do whatever it was, maybe it was just a cybersecurity posture assessment, we'd always ask the question, because you got to get scope right, because that leads to bad project outcomes, and nobody wants to have scope creep or
right.
not one time in those early years throughout the late 80s and the 90s when I would do these engagements and I would ask somebody about how far up chain they wanted us to go in terms of supply chain, no one ever wanted us to look at anybody else. And it wasn't just Baxter, it was SolarWinds, right? It was CrowdStrike, right? Because I
Yeah.
don't I trust them to push that upload to me. It wasn't, and all of the integrity checks that the frameworks tell us we have to do. Can I confirm that it came from them? Yes. Can I confirm that it was not changed in transit? Yes. Because it was compromised before that. To your point, way left of
Because it was evil from the beginning. Yeah. And
right.
actually, I'm glad you brought that up because that is, there is a certain level of trust that we're putting into these, protect me from the bad things. We're paying money for this things. Again, I was in the pre-sales industry. We sold a lot of this stuff. It's very, there's a very large cybersecurity industry, but it's interesting. There's also a paired shadow economy of like the impact of cyber attacks on the economy and then the money that is being spent to stop it, and both keep going up. I think the impact is actually going up faster than cybersecurity industry is growing, which is not heartening.
Oh, I would agree with that. The progression that we've made just in the past 10 or 15 years will call out FBI Director Chris Wray and CISA Director Jen Easterly, who testified annually. They would testify in Congress, but this is probably 2, maybe 3 years ago. It was the very first time that they didn't hint at who was living off the land and who was embedded in the routers and who could mess with our critical infrastructure whenever they wanted. They specifically called out the PRC by name, right? And then remember, these are the 16 critical infrastructure sectors that we declared after 9/11 as being our most important and worthy of great levels of protection, and a government-private partnership and information sharing centers and all of those kinds of good practices that we had not before had. Are we better for those? Yes. Is it enough? No. Right? We still need more assistance. And I think I'm calling it a much bigger issue than anybody within the small community and the MIC can address individually. The United States finds itself at a disadvantage because of kind of a cultural question. Somebody even call it a moral question. We believe that there should be a separation between our government and our business community, right? Businesses, it's up to you to protect yourself. The government may be able to help with legislation to say that kind of behavior is illegal. This is what we want you to do, but the government isn't doing it for us, right?
Right.
And when we look around and we say, well, why are people hacking? Why are they doing this? I don't want people to think this is anything other than just the world's economy. We're in a global economy. We have diminishing natural resources, and all of us companies, we are all striving to get our share of that diminishing pie. How do we do that? The competitive pressures to succeed are greater. I'm faced with a choice. Do I take a decade of time and spend billions in R&D to figure out the answer to my critical questions that make my business succeed? Or do I borrow your answer, right? Some countries, it's not illegal to hack, right?
Right.
And if you take that moral separation, worse yet, there are many countries where Look, we all know we're all listening to one another. And I don't mean the phones. I mean governments are all spying on one another. It's not just everybody thinks, oh, it's the axis of evil. It's Russia and China and North Korea. Yeah, but it's also the United States and France and Canada and everybody else. We're all doing this. The difference is that if the NSA found something that was very useful to you in your business, they're not calling you up going, hey, I want you to have this information about what your competitor across the pond is doing. Right. Other countries aren't so naive. And I'm going to use that word because I'm not saying it's the right way to approach it, but we are naive in that if we won't do it and knowing that our competitors are.
Right.
And the most recent paradigm shift is the move to AI. Everything we just talked about is really important, but it is no longer possible for you to enter or win this battle manually, right? You got a SOC, you got a SIM, you've got your alerts, they're coming up on the glass. And if you think a human at a keyboard, I don't care how fast your fingers move, you cannot keep up. If you're being attacked by an AI at internet speed, you have to defend at internet speed. In fact, you better pre-plan for the attack. Segmentation, and I mean air-walled segmentation, honeypots, deceptive technologies. The NSA, I don't know that they still have it, but they used to have a document. Again, if you're old, you remember things like this. It was called the AODG, and it acknowledged that, pick whichever framework you want, not all of those controls are equally important or relevant. Some of them, perfect example, do I have a documented playbook or documented disaster recovery plan? Absolutely right. Essential, right? Because you don't even know if the person who is doing the job will be available during the crisis. They may, there's a tornado headed towards your data center, and the key person says, oh, wait a minute, my son's daycare is in direct line of the tornado. I got to get to them to safety. They're not even around. So if you don't have documentation to give to somebody else to implement that hurts you. No doubt. But does that really keep the bad guy out? Not having documentation? No. There are other things that you can do. One of which is the adversarial obstructive defense guidelines, right? Obfuscation. There was one point where I was under contract and we were literally required to stand up a fake site that wasn't the real site. That's very much what Guard Tower is like, right? It's the same philosophy of you can beat up on it, because it ain't real.
Oh no! Don't attack the wood frame town. Blazing Saddles, the fake town, the fake Red Rock town. That is literally what we were doing. That all you got to do is if they just dropped a bomb on the town as soon as the bad guys showed up, because you have like you said, no legit reason to be here. Your activities themselves are the alert.
Right. Now, and it's funny because people that remember when the notions of honeypots and honey nets first came out, one of the challenges we had was, how do you fool the wily hacker? They're going to see very quickly through the facade. They're going to realize that this is a deception and it's not. Usually it was because we couldn't keep the data current. Well, now we have the cloud. Now we have crowdsourcing. Now we have AI. So we've got technologies that can make this a very deceptive lure, very attractive, and maybe the top tier folks aren't going to get fooled, but the majority of them, what is the adage? You don't have to outrun the grizzly bear. You just have to outrun the other company, right?
Exactly. Well, and not only that, think about the people that are the adversaries. Because again, you mentioned a tornado. I find that we do this. We think of this like a hack is like a storm or something like that. Where in reality, what would happen is that the hacker is actually inside the tornado, steering it deliberately at the child's, plaything before they hit the primary data center, the backup data center, and then they're just going to do donuts on it until it's done.
Well, actually, if we're going to continue with this extended metaphor, I think the entire tornado itself is a ruse.
Yeah.
Right.
There never was a tornado. Well, yeah, it's just a tool. It looks like it.
I grew up on Saturday mornings before my mom, chased us kids outside.
Saturday morning
cartoons. But then after the cartoons, there were Westerns. Now, I really am dating myself at this point, but these were black and white movies where you had to break your buddies out who were held in the fort against their will or whatever the situation was. What was the plan? They would get together and make a plan. And the very first thing that they would say is, we need a distraction. So, question one for you guys, whenever you have a security event that is brought to your attention, before you decide to react, first ask yourself, is this the actual attack or is this the deception? Right.
Right.
You don't want to misspend your efforts or go over there so that people can quietly come in when you're not looking.
Yeah. And I do appreciate the metaphors that because actually that's the one thing that I found is that what we talk about is very confusing. We love our acronyms. There's just TMA, too many acronyms. And most people, we start talking about cyber and NIST and all this stuff, and they get a glazed look in their eye where I know that the brain is just shut down to help protect them from what we're trying to teach them. Putting it like, again, the metaphor of some things are more important than others. So this is the way I would put what you just said. If you're trying to secure your house and you're now arguing about having a lock on your upstairs medicine cabinet, and I point down, you don't have a front door or windows, that I would argue would be a more important. And if you do have a door, it doesn't have a lock. Well, you should do that next because that's one, much more cost effective than spending all your money on a very high-end cloud connected medicine cabinet locking solution in a system where you haven't invested in the basics. But then there's that playbook, like you said, like if you have a alert system, well, the alert gets sent to a specific person. They know what to do. There's a playlist. And if you don't have that playlist, that's when we take the step back, like, all right, here's a professional services. You need to have an incident response plan because during an event, you can't be figuring this out on the fly. And actually, the adversaries would you agree, are probably counting on you trying to figure this stuff out on the fly because you'll lose. It would be like a football team trying to make up an offense as they go because, it just, the bad guys aren't playing fair. They're in it to win.
Of course.
Well, and
So
actually,
I think there's different kinds of bad guys, and we've all seen the reports. I'm not concerned about every hacker who hacks for every reason.
Right.
I'm not worried about hacktivism. Right. That's sometimes people have a cause, and we saw that.
Right.
I'm also not worried about what we saw in the Ukraine. I think many of us in the cyber community knew that there was a land war that was imminent before Russia went in. Why was cyber used? Well, it's the fifth theater of war, and they were softening their target for the kinetic war that came afterwards. I'm also not worried about that because, the customers that I work with aren't strategic military targets, right? Now, I think that definition is radically underdefined. Just as a side note, we're talking about building AI data centers that we're going to have to power with small local nuclear reactors right next door, right?
Yep.
The heat signature between the AI data center and the nuke could probably be seen from space. And I'm pretty sure that we are not going to fortify them as a military target that they are. Right. So, I mean, that's what I'm saying. But for me, I'm not worried about them. Those do exist. That's not necessarily part of what I'm worried about. I'm worried about two other things. I'm worried about, and by the way, obviously there are hackers who hack for credibility. I do a lot of research on the deep and dark web to get into the really meaningful conversations in the right circles. You have to be dirty or thought to be dirty, right? I mean, this is no different than an undercover man or woman on the job. Donnie Darko, not Donnie Darko, Donnie Brasco, right? You got to be dirty for me to trust you. That's the idea. You have to have a successful hack in your name so that I can trust you when you come in. The most telling thing that I've seen when I'm in a lot of these conversations is very quickly I will be asked, can we switch to Chinese? Can we switch to Mandarin? Or can we switch to Russian? And if I can't do that, and if I can't speak natively in slang very quickly, I get narked out and the conversation's over because they don't trust me. By the way, in speaking of the value of threat hunting, this is something also not aimed at the small business market, but for more advanced listeners who are considering what can they do for those kinds of threats. Threat hunting is absolutely vital. To continue with our analogy about the house not having the door, once you put the door on and once it's locked, if you know which window or other door the bad guys are going to use to break in, then you don't have to patch or fix them all, right?
Right.
And that's huge because again, we have to fix them all, but they're not all necessarily viable avenues of entry. So sometimes, what was it? It was the Thursday before WannaCry came out. Was the first time I saw someone shopping for an exploit online by CVE number. I had seen plenty of times before that where it's, hey, help me break into this application, help me break into this organization. But it wasn't, I have, so basically what it told me is someone had found an existence of a hole, an enumerated CVE vulnerability somewhere. And
And
now
that
they had the
critical
hole.
CVE stands for what? Critical
Common
vulnerability.
vulnerability and enumeration. It's the
Okay.
name when we discover flaws and weaknesses in applications and network and other infrastructure, so that this team understands it's the same one as this, and we don't add to our own chaos. We're cooperating on the good guy side. This is the issue. This is how it manifests itself, and it gives you other details. Is there exploit code in the wild? How technically savvy do you have to be in order to exploit this? It puts a rating, a severity level on it. It will tell you whether the vendor has issued a patch yet, or whether that's on their plan, and if there are any compensating controls, what you can do in the interim. But when you have that information, now, man, I know, go patch that one hole. So for WannaCry, I remember coming back in and talking to Adam, a buddy of ours that we both know. How are we doing on this particular vulnerability? He said, we're about 85% patched. This was a Thursday. I said, push to get us to 100% by the end of day Friday. And thank God I did, because that following Monday is when WannaCry came out and taken advantage of that SMB 1.0 issue. So
Yep.
for the rest of us, though, first of all, the first thing you need to do as a small business is talk to a competent cybersecurity person, someone that can help you understand the conversation. How do you make technology decisions? Are you aware that there are these risks when you do business this way? I'm choosing a cloud provider. I'm choosing a platform. I'm choosing an operating system. I'm choosing a piece of hardware. I'm going to choose a piece of IT or OT, right? Up until recently, the OT was probably one of my biggest sandboxes. Shame on all of us in this industry for allowing IT to develop at the same time while being managed, while OT was writing in parallel, as somehow this other thing that wasn't on my network was somebody else's problem. We all had our heads in the sand. And then suddenly we realized, no, everybody, I want to be able to, here's a perfect example. If I'm a farmer, I don't want to have to travel 200 miles to change an irrigation setting on a pump. I want to be able to do that from my keyboard. I want to use my IT infrastructure to manage my OT infrastructure. Well, if I can change that setting from a keyboard here, then somebody around the other side of the world might be able to do that too if I haven't done that the right way. And that's really, those are the things that I'm concerned about. So let's get back to, I wasn't concerned about the military or the people hacking for political cause. It's the people that are doing it for money. There is money to be made, and I don't know what the exact statistics are. I read one a couple of years ago that basically likened the cybersecurity crime. They put an economic value on it, and I think they said if we treated it like a national economy, it would be the world's third largest economy behind the United States and China, like $7 trillion worth. There's some huge number. That's
and
what I'm
going
worried
up,
about.
basically.
Right. If they've got, and by the way, for your listeners who may not know, we're familiar with cloud models of blank as a service, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. Well, guess what? There's ransomware as a service. I can go online, enter the name of my hated competitor, the Hatfields, said Mr. McCoy. I want you to attack them. I give them I enter their URL, and I enter some Bitcoin or whatever other form of payment that they'll take, and they will take care of everything else for me. What a great way of taking your competitor out of business. Now you better be prepared to deal with it yourself, right?
Right.
But that's where we are. So those are the things that worry about me, especially when there's money to be made. Now,
real quick, just the saying we always had is, why did bank robbers rob banks? That's where the money.
Willie Sutton, right back in the days when bank robbers were celebrities, I think he was the one that famously
dressed up for the game. They dressed up for exactly. As long as you weren't there when the police arrived, you were 99% likely to get
right. Now, I still don't understand why people think cyber is this other thing.
Preach.
Ask yourself this: when you go to the bank, for anybody that actually does that anymore. You still need to go to an ATM. I guess you could rely on Venmo and other platforms on your phone. But if you needed cash for some reason, you had to physically go to the bank. Your money that's on deposit with that bank is not coins and paper sitting piled up in a bank vault somewhere. It's not. It is a bit in a computer. So we've established that money is data, right? And by the transitive property, therefore, data equals money. So
sure is.
If your business relies on this data, and if I can encrypt it, I'm not even talking about the consequences of breach, because presumably you've protected your own data. It could be encrypted. Now I can encrypt it again, but you can't unencrypt it.
Right.
You can't. I've held it hostage. Now you have to pay me the ransom in order. Well, unless you've got a immutable backup, physically isolated. Now, I've still taken your systems down and offline, and you're going to suffer the impact of having to go through a recovery process, a time-consuming recovery process that you may not find enjoyable, but at least I can't be extorted. Those are the kinds of things I'm worried about. But the bigger issue I'm worried about goes back to supply chain. If, as FBI Director Wray and others have said, they're already in what was the movie? The phone calls coming from inside the house.
Yeah, they're already in.
They got it. Look, whether it was Kill Chain or back in the day, Hacking Exposed, that Mudge and his crew, the books that they've read, these are the processes they go through. You do your recon, you get in. As soon as you do, you're worried that however I got in, they may close that hole. So I'm going to leave myself another way to come back in later. And then I just leave. And now there's no activity for you to see. But now, what does that mean? And again, depends on who we think our adversaries are. But recognizing that this is a global planet and we're in competitive pressures, if, let's just say, we did something that another country in the world didn't agree with, one of the levers that they could pull is to say, if you don't see things my way, I'm going to threaten you with an exploitation of your critical infrastructure. Yep. It's called critical infrastructure for a reason. I'm going to take down your power system. I don't even have to take them all down, or your water systems. I just have to have one or two successes, and the panic alone that would, if there's a water system that is treating your water that you drink chemically, and I put too much of the wrong chemical in there, or I don't clean it up and you're drinking sewage, either way, your water is not available. 3 days. Right? We can go, physically, we can live for 3 days without water. That's a pretty powerful lever for an opposing government to present to our leaders. What would you do in that case? Well, you going to go nuke? Or what are you going to do? Well, I'm hopeful that we have done the same.
I hope we don't find out
to them, right? I mean, Stuxnet was an example where things happen. I'm not saying anything. I don't know anything. I'm just saying that was an example where it looked like the West used that approach to get people in the East to see things their way. So it goes in both directions. But those are the challenges that I'm concerned about. I spent a lot of time in healthcare. No one in their right mind would enter the healthcare business. And if you are a healthcare practitioner, God bless you. I think the world of you. We all need you. But who in their right mind would choose to enter a business where the law says you must provide services even if you have no power? You must provide those services even if you have zero tech available. And by the way, you still have to provide services even if your customer can't pay you. Gee, where do I sign up for that business? Right? And then you wonder, how are you going to secure those flows and data and make sure that you don't have a breach and don't have bad outcomes? Because, unlike not all of the infrastructures are critical. Water, it's important that you get the quality of the water right. Same thing with patient quality outcome. If I get bad data, maybe it was somebody that came in for medical identity theft, right? I don't have insurance. So I'm walking in, I show up in the hospital. Hi, I'm Colin. I'm here because I know Colin has insurance. They give me my medical procedure, but in the process, they notice that, the blood type that we had on file for Colin doesn't seem to be the blood type that you're presenting, sir. Me, right? Because they entered my blood type in the record. Now you show up, the real you shows up, and now you need a transfusion of blood, and they look in the records because you're unconscious, and they go, oh, look, Colin's be positive, which is what I am, and
Yep.
you're like, oh, I may be negative.
I'm O positive. That would be very bad for me.
That's what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Or God forbid it was an organ, or whatever. You get the point. I
Yeah.
don't think we have a lot of
You
those
don't have to
events
be
happening.
super creative to kill people in the medical industry
And I want to make sure
accidentally.
we're not fomenting, hysteria here. I'm not saying that these are likely events. I'm saying they're possible events, and our adversaries would not have to do many of them. One or two small little events, and the loss of trust. Remember what this is all about. It's all about having trust in, because most of us are part of a larger ecosystem. We don't operate in business alone. I have
Right.
customers, I have suppliers, I have raw material manufacturers, I've got vendors and partners, and all these other, many of us have ecosystems, right? If you're in insurance, there's a whole network or real
I
estate or
live in
whatever.
Maryland in the United States. Those are two ecosystems right there that we
Right,
live in that we don't want disrupted.
right.
It's it actually. So I'll say to the listeners, we're not trying to foment fear. However, is this more like a peek into this? Welcome to our world, where this
So,
like no, this isn't science fiction. It's like it could totally happen. And my biggest struggle is convincing people that they would be affected. Most of, I don't know if you see this, is like, well, how many times have you ever heard that I'm too small? They would never come after me. My counter, at least, is the you're part of the supply chain. And oh, by the way, it isn't a dude that looks like me in a hoodie banging on a computer. It's an AI that's doing it. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't get bored. It just does its task. And if you have very easily
yeah,
securable vulnerabilities, you're getting hit.
the way I respond to people with that is I do two things. Number one, I can send a copy of it, or you can find it online. Brian Krebs, we all know and love, this intrepid cyber reporter who's often the first person to break a lot of these news stories. He put together a graphic that said, "This is the value to a hacker of a compromised PC." Because everybody says, "Why would somebody want to compromise me?" Well, number one, if I put your bot together with 49,999 other ones, I've got a 50,000 node botnet that I can
Right.
sell to somebody online.
Botnet as a service.
Exactly. The other thing people don't understand is there's a difference between being targeted and being the subject of an opportunistic attack. If you have a connection to the internet, you are being scanned, whether it's by Microsoft, like you just mentioned earlier, whether it's for benign reason, or whether it's for an adversarial reason. Think of it this way, um, and I'm gonna get a little bit cynical here.
Bring it
When
on.
the deep and dark web, for those who aren't familiar, if you understand that eBay in the real world exists, you don't think that there's a bad version of eBay? Very different product
Evil
mix.
eBay.
Very different product mix.
Amazon.
Okay. Exactly. But the level of innovation that we see on the 4 to 5% of the internet that is what most people think of as the internet is
Right.
dwarfed in comparison. So I don't care whether you want to buy black tar heroin or weapons.
Sure.
You can do all of that stuff, but you can
Yeah.
also buy exploit code, right? This all exists, in these other environments. If you don't understand the motivation, right? You don't necessarily understand. I mean, everybody's immediately thinking that it's individuals, like you said with the hoodie. Well, when I go online and I see that someone is looking to buy exploit code, let's just say I've developed that code. Well, no honor amongst thieves. I want to sell that to you. You want to buy it for me. How do we do that? We don't trust one another. The brokers, that whole entire market was developed so that it's kind of like escrow. I will give them my code, you will give them the money, they will change hands, everybody's happy. And that's how it was for at least the first 5 or 10 years that I was on the deep and dark web. More recently, I've noticed the broker's role is changed. They're now the market maker. So, for example, I came across one where someone was looking to buy, imagine this, exploit code that would install itself surreptitiously without the user being aware onto an iPhone that would give the bad actor full God level root access to the device. Wow. And I see that. I'm like, well, I'm glad I don't have an Apple. That was my first thought. It's a bit of a joke. Nothing wrong with Apple. The second thought was, how much is it? was curious. $20 million is the price that they would sell. Now, this doesn't exist yet. So the brokers have changed from the transaction process of helping you and the person you want to buy and sell from making that deal happen. They're now making the market. They're saying to the hackers, go find this and I will pay you this $20 million. Well, who can afford to pay $20 million? It's not Alpha
Hackers.
V. It's not, no, it's not Alpha V. It's not Black Hat. I mean, I know they're well funded, but no, it's nation state sponsors,
Right.
especially those where there's no distinction between their nation state and their hacker communities or their nation states and business. That's what we're up against. So if they're already in here, why might they already be in here? Well, people forget firmware. We all, I was beholden to the FISMA guidelines and NIST 800-53, which for many of us in the US is the big dominant control framework. And there were statements in there that we all ignored like they weren't even on the page. It said you must scan for and address vulnerabilities in, first it was in networks. Yep, we got that. Then, we realized, there's applications that have vulnerabilities too. We got to have application vulnerabilities. The word firmware, it would say hardware, software, and firmware. And we all ignored the word firmware as though it literally wasn't on the page. Why? Because touching firmware means you can break some stuff that is really important that will cost people their jobs. I mean, it is literally what the IT teams are afraid of, is messing with firmware, right? Well, that's the software that gets embedded when it gets made. Where did it get made? Right? So if I'm buying
hardware, software, and firmware, and I'm like, wait a minute, there's hardware and there's software. There isn't like this. It's just a deeper level of, I mean, technically.
It is, but
it's
but people think of software as the stuff
like
they install. Yeah. Right. It's not the stuff that it comes with out of the box.
It's the deeper magic, that it's the matrix itself. And again, we live in such a complicated world that it feels like a lot of this is just magic. It's magic, the magic box does the thing, and the hackers use evil magic to do their hack attacks and stuff like that. Because
right.
I, as an advanced ape, cannot really comprehend this, all that is occurring. I'm looking at a computer right now. It's I've got about 20 tabs open. We're communicating with each other over a geographically significant distance, in the cloud. We live in Star Trek as far as I'm concerned, but it's also, and I guess it feels almost like there's a failure of imagination for most people to comprehend the fact that, like what you just said, that there's like an evil version. And I almost have to laugh at this sort of thing, to think that there might be right now an evil podcast where an evil Jason is talking to an evil Colin. None of us have beards. We're clean shaven in that version about, and again,
we're not the evil version.
Having that kind of conversation about, these are the latest hacks. This is what we're seeing. This is the new opportunities for Windows 11 because we found an exploit. Those things actually exist, probably somewhere. And it's wild, that like the things that got me into this was, again, those big attacks like the Colonial Pipeline. That's what was my moment of like, oh, a computer attack means I can't put gas in my wife's car. That's bad. It was perpetuated by a group called R Evil and Dark Side and things like they are giving themselves. I feel like I'm living in a cartoon from the 1980s where, Shredder is going to take over the world by controlling all the computers. And it's like they're giving themselves supervillain names. And I'm like, but no, this is real world that we live in. It's just
art imitating life, or life imitating art.
Sometimes I don't know anymore. But, to bring it back to what you were talking about, Guard Tower, that's what got me into this, was this fear of it could all break. And again, I have a 9-year-old son born in 2016. He has never, you and I remember the time before the computers where we would just go outside for a while and you just didn't know things. My son has never known a time about ubiquitous computers, always on internet, the ability to do apps and things like that. And if it breaks, what got my reason, my why, was I was afraid that they would, again, for the most part, these are criminals that are not really thinking about the big picture. My fear, my Armageddon vision was, imagine Google, Microsoft, and Amazon all going dark simultaneously. What would you do? My fear was that we would like they would break so much that we wouldn't be able to turn it back on. It was like if you remember the blackout in 2003, where like you said, you don't have to attack the whole system, but just getting it back restarted, you could see the stars for the first time in New York City in quite some time. It was very, very strange. And fortunately, it got fixed within that 3 day period. So we didn't, have to resort to cannibalism or whatever cyber techno feudalism immediately. Um,
Well,
no,
I
that's
think that's a good segue into what organizations can and should do.
right.
So we mentioned that you should talk to somebody who knows what they're doing, someone experienced in cyber, whether that's an internal CISO, if you have the financial wherewithal to sustain someone. There are virtual CISOs that you can acquire on a fractional basis. There are consulting firms and cybersecurity firms that have professional services that can help you with this. There's audit firms. If you are driven to meet a certain audit requirement, you can't use the same audit firm for both, but you can use one that's experienced with that framework to give you a shadow audit to kind of tell you how you would fare if they were
Right.
doing the audit, and they can help you develop the controls that you need. That's a good place to start. If I were starting a new business today, I would not have a network. I think for many small startups, there is no need for a network. You need a domain. You need to have a marketing website, but that doesn't mean a network. You have somebody host it. There's not necessarily any transactions that are happening there. It's a marketing business. But if I don't have a network, why? Well, because everything else is being fulfilled by a series of apps or providers or cloud services, and I can get some good security controls from them. Now, is that enough? No. Is that everything? No, but it's certainly more than a small startup could do on their own.
Better than nothing. And
Right.
yeah, I agree. And actually, it just reminded me, I'd like to give a shout out again to the MIC. One of the benefits of being an ongoing member there is that Jason is one of the entrepreneurs in residence there. Like his mentorship is included with my subscription. So for me, for the CISO functionality alone is, a value on that one.
Yeah, I
Because,
think Maryland does itself a real service as a way of differentiating both Howard County as well as the state as a whole. There's 21, 22 incubators, whatever we want to refer to them as, business accelerators in
the
Maryland.
MBA,
There's
yeah.
hundreds, if not thousands, across the country. This is not unique to us, but I think we're one of the very few, certainly we were the first, to have these kinds of entrepreneurs in residence. You're a young startup. You're spending every waking hour figuring how you convert your hours into dollars, how you can grow your business. You're not thinking about your risk. You're probably, if you're thinking about it, only thinking about it in terms of the amount of risk that you're taking because you
Right.
have to. And maybe in those early stages you can because you haven't got a lot of money yet at stake. Very quickly, though, that's going to change. And you need to make sure that when you're making those technology decisions, you are only accepting the risks that you know about and you find acceptable. So the next thing that I would recommend is making sure, as part of your buy process, I'm just going to use that term loosely. I don't care whether you're buying tongue depressors or computers, whatever your supply chain, whatever your acquisition, wherever you make those technology decisions, you need to be asking these questions. So much of this is not about, let's understand what the objective is. It's not about perfect security. That is an impossible. The only way for something to be a perfectly secure, you'd have to turn it off, lock it up, put it in a box, put the box in a closet or a vault, and put a guard on it. Right? Is
And
it?
no human can interact with it ever.
And that's exactly the point. In that state,
Completely
it is
useless,
it is useless.
but
By
very
definition,
secure.
right, but very secure. By
Not only
definition,
secure.
we have
Yeah.
to use these things, which means we're going to accept certain level of risk because we have to expose ourselves to that level of risk to use these devices. So it's about defensibility. Think about your customers who chose to engage in business with you. In the United States, we haven't even answered this question yet. In the EU, they answered it by law. Citizens of the EU own their own data. Here in the United States, we are one of three parties, if not four parties, that has an equal claim to that data. So if I make a credit card purchase off of Amazon. Amazon's the vendor. They're entitled to some of the data. They sold me. They've got inventory. They know what I am. They know what I like. All that data. I'm the buyer. I have entitled to that. The controller, the processor. There's two other parties potentially, right? The credit card companies. They were part of that conversation. They have a right as well. We haven't answered that yet. But in order to take that data, I have to show respect for that customer. So when I give the data to this app, the customer didn't say, I chose to use that app. No, they did business with me, my company. I chose to give it to that cloud provider or to this other provider, a third party. I have to be able to defend that decision. It's not about making the perfect decision. This is so complex. The chances of getting it 100% right all the time, making sure that every vulnerability that everybody has is patched, it's not going to happen. I have to make sure that I have
all future vulnerabilities as well for the infinite future,
exactly.
at 100%.
So can you defend the decision? What do you mean you just bought that without asking him any of these questions? That's not defensible, right? Yeah. And remember, folks,
passing the essay portion of the test. Can you explain? I bought a Cisco firewall. Okay,
right,
why?
But it's worse. So to draw the analogy, I remember I had a couple of very interesting professors in my undergraduate program, and it didn't matter if you got the right answer. You could still get partial credit if you showed logical thinking and defended how you arrived at that conclusion, right?
Yep.
That's good. But keep in mind, it's not one professor we have to convince here. When I say you have to defend your decision, who gets to decide what's reasonable? Is it the people that made the law? No. Is it the people that enforce the law? You might think, no, not them either. Is it the people like you and me who have the technical savvy to know what's actually technically feasible? Nope. You
Definitely
know who
not.
it is? It's those 12 men. It's those 12 men and women who weren't smart enough to get themselves out of jury duty. They're the ones that are going to decide whether what I did was reasonable or not. So unfortunately, that's the benchmark that you have to meet, or the yardstick, however you want to refer to it. That's the litmus test you must meet. Can I convince them that this decision was defensible? Yes, we had a repeatable process. It involved asking vendors these questions and getting answers. And if it was not acceptable, not buying the thing, or taking it up chain and escalating it for some sort of risk acceptance or a variance. That's what's defensible about this. So that's where I would have everybody focus. Beyond that, like we said, if you can't do everything, early detection, effective response, don't try to do this on your own. I was around when companies used to build their own internal security operations centers. Think about what that is. Most companies, we don't work 24/7. Even if that might be 3 shifts of people, but you don't have 1 shift, right? The opportunities, when are they going to break in? Are they going to break in at 9:00 in the morning when everybody's there in front of the computers? Probably not. 9:00 at night, 2:30 in the morning? Yeah, that's when they're going to break in, right? So do you have somebody on the help desk or on the SOC at that hour? Not if it's inside. You would have to spend over $1 million just in labor alone to give yourselves 3 shift coverage 7 days a week, right? And that's if you're going to load it and provide the benefits and have vacation and sick time. That's just the labor alone without any of the tools. It doesn't make sense for most organizations to do that. Outsourcing to a third-party SOC is very useful. Now, here's the fundamental challenge. There's 2 problems with this that a lot of people aren't recognizing, or they're under-recognizing. Number 1, the big boys, the big clouds, they got a giant target on their back that's bigger than any target that would ever been put on little old you, right? If you don't think the Amazons and the Googles and the Microsoft, the big cloud providers have huge targets. The good news is they are designed with resiliency in mind, high availability, load balance, cluster pairs in multiple geographies. The network that they maintain, the infrastructure is going to be resilient. It's going to stay up. However, since the first time we created it, it is still riddled with single points of failure. The internet, the public network, is not resilient. Cloud's up, but you may not be able to get there, right?
Yep.
So let's talk about a couple of things. Number 1, 9/11, most of us will remember that the cellular network was overwhelmed and we all got busy signals. For people who don't even know what a busy signal is, it didn't work. You couldn't get through, right? That can happen.
Real quick, I was sophomore year in college and I had my flip phone. For people that don't know, that's before we had smartphones. First time really being away on my own but knowing that I had my cell phone, I could call my parents if I needed to. 9/11 happens, we're not too far from the Pentagon, and that was my first taste of something that was designed not to act as an emergency system. It was not, we all tried to use it at the same time, and it failed equally for everyone. And that was terrifying. Like, just like there's the phones aren't working, you know?
Well, that was a perfect point. And let me make a segue into this. I'm on what's called FirstNet. Now, some of your audience may know what this is. After 9/11, we recognized that it wasn't just fire hoses that couldn't connect, right? It was the cellular network. So our friends at AT&T lobbied the government. They said, we really need this for fire police, EMS, and hospitals for mass casualty events to have a system. You got to have signal, but as long as you have signal, those communications will be given prioritization and they will be guaranteed delivery. How do you do that? It's a physically separate network, separate equipment, chips made in the United States. It's fantastic. And yet, not this past February, the prior year, pretty sure it was last February, there was an outage. How was there an outage? Right? And this is, I'm not going to get into what the cause of the outage was. There's various speculation we can get into later. The point is, something that we relied upon that was specifically designed for that purpose wasn't available. And I'm not disparaging it. It's a great network. And
100%, 100% is a really high number.
Right. Right. Nobody, if anybody asks your vendors what's the highest uptime they'll give you, it's 6 nines. They're not giving you 100%. Right.
Yep.
I have a need to get to the cloud. Cloud's up. My internet isn't. I have domain name service, DNS, still has a single point of failure. I had certain industries like healthcare rely on local municipal governments for access to power and internet. I don't mean to disparage our county governments. They are not the most well-staffed and well-funded of all the governments. In fact, they're probably the least well-staffed and least well-funded. And yet they're the ones that we have to rely on in critical infrastructure for that last mile of connectivity. I've had fiber cuts. I remember learning about a guy in a backhoe, and I think it was, what was it? I think it was a squirrel. It was a squirrel back in the late 80s or the 90s that took the NASDAQ down. Remember that one? Like it fried itself on a power line or a generator or something. But again, your network, the cloud's up, data center's running, it's live.
We didn't count on that stupid squirrel, getting in there.
So I think these are things that people need to think about. So security is supposed to be about CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. That doesn't tell the right story. When we built the internet, and I was there when I was on ARPANET before the internet, we said, wait a minute, what if one of these computers that we're increasingly rely on for more important things, what if one of them took a strike? We got to distribute the compute so that we can avoid that single point of failure. Great. That was an availability conversation. That was issue one. We did that. Then, frankly, for the last 30 years, we've been worried about the C, the confidentiality, privacy, breaches. Integrity is what this is now. I don't care how you get your news. There's no news services that check their facts the way we did in the era of a Walter Cronkite. I mean, those days are gone. Just the time to market demands for the news cycle don't allow you to check their facts.
Yep.
What if somebody posted something on social media? There's nothing keeping me from posting something that's completely untrue. And many of these social media platforms say it is not their responsibility to police the content of what gets posted. Wait a minute. Again, I can't walk into a movie theater and yell fire, but online I can say I can go on Facebook and say that the Rialto movie theater is on fire.
Yeah.
Right? Or I can say that so-and-so, what would happen if I said, I don't know, let's pick a generic example. I don't know. Let's go back to the supply chain. What if I posted something that said, hey, Baxter's having another instance of their issue. Everybody that depends on them would freak out, right? It would cause a run on the markets. I mean, we could do the same thing. There's a run on the banks. I mean, all it has to do is make a couple of false statements that aren't properly vetted that get picked up and perpetuated. It was the radio play with Orson Welles, the War of the
The War of
Worlds,
the
right?
Worlds, where everyone went crazy.
To
Yeah.
me, integrity is becoming the issue. Right now, most companies, I shouldn't say most, many companies are now modifying their help desk protocols when a user calls in requesting that something happen. Hey, I need you to reset my password, right? Okay, get on camera. You have to get on camera now. And you got to take your badge and mush it into your face because I need to know that you're not a deep fake. That's an integrity question.
Right.
I think increasingly that's what we have to deal with. How do I know that it's you, right?
How do I know that you are you? Yeah.
And then I don't know anything about the way the world will wind up, but I know the direction that we're moving in. And it is a change in where IT happens. Increasingly, it is going to where the person is rather than a very distributed model. Again, let's just talk about healthcare. Hospitals without walls, healthcare at home. That is the direction that we're moving in, right? Okay, well, how does that work? Am I bringing internet with me to you? Am I going to rely on your home internet? Ooh, that's kind of scary. Discussing sensitive medical information, whatever it might be, sensitive financial transactions, whatever, on your home internet. In my neighborhood, about half of my neighborhood still works from home. I won't mention the name of the internet service provider that many of us use, but that company still does maintenance at 12 noon regularly. Why? Because back in the day, pre-COVID, everybody worked in an office. No one was in a neighborhood during the day, so it was a safe time to do those kinds of updates. Now I have a cellular backup and an up system and everything else, because if I'm in the middle of a session like this and something goes down, it's an embarrassment to me. I have to keep that up. I have a justification for that investment as an owner of a cyber business, but not everybody else has that justification or can afford that expense, and yet they have that impact. So again,
and you're the engineer that's supporting it. You don't have to hire, because again, my parents don't know how to do a backup. It's me basically. The vast majority of people do not possess the skills.
I swear, if you are a business entrepreneur and you want a business, combine the cloud, everything as a service, whatever you want to call it. I will give you everything you need as a service. MSSP, because right now I can get a lot of stuff from Amazon or Microsoft, but let's just say they alerted me to something that was happening. It's my responsibility to have an incident response program. Well, little old me, I have one, but the average small business owner, they wouldn't have those capabilities of the staff to do anything. And even if I gave you intel, like one of the reasons of having a SOC is that you can learn from others in your industry who are being attacked ahead of you so that you can take the response action and avoid compromise. If I gave most small business owners actionable intel, they wouldn't know what to do with it or have the technical capabilities to actually take action on it. So as a business, if you wanted to turnkey all of that, I will give you a cloud instance. I will give you your email. I will give you your incident response and your security and your logging and everything else. Now, you're going to have to give up a little bit of privacy, because that means I'm going to have an agent on your computer, and it may mean that you may not be able to do everything that you want to do. I've taken away some of your control. If you want to install an app, for example, no, you can't just download any crazy ass thing you want from the internet. I don't even know what that is. No, of course not. I'm not going to allow you to download it and install that.
But I want to watch free movies during my lunch hour. Come on. It's highly recommended on my Google search.
The other thing that I would encourage organizations to do is recognize that this thing is not some other thing. The C-suite, I don't care whether you're one person shop and you wear all C hats or you've got 12 men and women, each of whom are having a different slice of the pie. The C-suite is a pie. It is the risk pie. The CFO deals with financial risks. You've got an insurance guy dealing with those risks, and you've got human risks that are being dealt with by whomever's the head of HR, and you've got IT risk. I mean, that's what that is. It's not some other strange thing. And I don't know why that perception that it's not well understood. If you put it in those terms, your board would get it, your senior leadership would get it, and even you would get it. So
Yeah. Well, and I'll agree and I'll expand it. It's actually in some ways worse that the CISO specifically is almost in some ways an adversary in some of the worst instances where you have the security not wanting to do anything and the IT people wanting to do stuff because they need to. Usually it's someone wanting to do something that isn't part of the policy. And when it's a toxic mix to treat security like the enemy because they're not the enemy. The enemy is outside of the organization. And that's also a challenge. Do you have any advice for people that are in security to almost to be heard better? Because I feel like a lot of us feel like just Cassandras. We're just a bunch of doomsayers that, something bad. We're always sticks in the mud. What are some ways that we can be more credible, I guess, or more likely for the people that are not technical to listen to us without compromise, without just being like, "Oh, do whatever you want," you know?
yeah. I think we all know the answer to this, which is you can't be Dr. No, right? You have to be yes, but rather than no. So change what you have to. Let me back up. I belong to a CISO roundtable. It's one of the oldest and largest in the country. And over the past couple of years, we were noticing that a lot of CISOs were being let go or they were separating from their employers, whether it was on them. I'm sure a small percentage of it is just when you're dealing with executives, sometimes the fit just isn't there. Sometimes it's a new management team came into the company and he or she at the top brought in his or her team,
Yeah,
right? It
my
wasn't
people.
so. But for the rest of them, I think it's because they failed to define for the organization what their job is. If you're saying, here's all the bad things that could happen, that is not what your mission is. Your mission is sit down with leadership, even if you're just a fly on the wall in the ops meeting. What is our objective? And if you're a lower level employee, grab a copy of your annual report or whatever vision statement your company has and says, this is what we're trying to do. Okay, that's the objective. How do you do that? Well, there's going to be a strategy, business objective, business strategy. At some point, it's hard to imagine, it's probably an exception, but hard to imagine any company doing anything of significance today where there isn't an IT strategy to support your business strategy. Now let's look at the IT strategy. What does it do? So that's where you're going to want to go through and look at all of the risks, but you're not going to respond with, here's all the ways that bad things can happen. That's not the message. The message is, I can help you figure out a way to do the thing that you want to do in a way that doesn't put us or our data or our customers' data at risk. Now you are an enabler, right? I think the
Good enough.
first time I had that kind of epiphany about the pivoting role, I was very fortunate to work with general counsel at another organization. He didn't have the cyber background, but he had a huge legacy in being a internal general counsel. And his job was to find a way to get the things that leadership wanted to accomplish done without it breaking the law.
Yeah.
And at first
Very
that
important
sounds
role,
like
yeah.
a horrible definition of a lawyer. Oh my God, you're working on the margin, you're finding loopholes, etc. No, I mean that's a savvy business person. That's not necessarily the wrong thing. Help us do what we want to do in a way that's legal, right? And it's the same thing here. This is what we want to do. Here's a perfect example. I remember that there were a couple of organizations I was working with who had they were publicly traded and they had a need to drive increases in stock price, right? We need a growth strategy. Well, how do you do that? Well, you go into new markets. And there was one of them was a US based organization that wanted to become a multinational. Great, we're going to expand into EU. And I said, well, hang on a second. You understand that there's this thing called data localization. The data has to stay physically in the EU if it belongs to an EU citizen. Right now, we are, in this case, we were a Microsoft shop. We were using a Microsoft cloud. That means we're going to have a second cloud. Oh, they were panicked. They were like, all of a sudden, they just immediately took and doubled the cost of our cloud for that. I'm like, no. You could do it that way. Fortunately, in this case, Microsoft, if you're an E5 customer, you for $2 per month per person, you had to tag the data. But if you did that, they would take care of making sure that data stayed physically in country where it belonged. Can't beat that. For $2 a person per month, you weren't going to be able to do it. So I found a way to enable them to do what they wanted. And in fact, I'm not saying everything should be expressed in financial terms, but if you can, I would, and this is one of the other recommendations I think that we talked about or started talking about, we never closed on, cyber insurance. Talk to your broker. Find out what they want.
Right.
Understand that the applications are fraught. Many of them have bad questions. Many of them ask the questions in bad ways. And you, as the cyber expert, if you really want to help, to your question that you just asked, if you can help make sure that those interpreting your responses to the cyber insurance application don't infer risks that don't exist. Let me give you an example.
Gotcha.
If you were a company that made widgets and most of your employees are on the widget making floor, and you got a couple, 10, 15% of your folks are administrative folks, in the accounting department or in HR or corporate or wherever. And the insurance company says, how many people do you have in your company? And you say, I have 100 people. But remember, 85 of them are manufacturing. It's 15 in the office. And then they say, how many of them have MFA? 15. Well, they're going to say, wait a minute, you got 100 people, 15% of them are the only ones with MFA? That's risky. The question they should have asked is how many people who need MFA have MFA? If the 85 people that are on your manufacturing floor don't even have an IT account because they come in and punch a time clock and work a widget making machine, why do they need MFA? But they didn't ask that question that way. So you have to know enough to put an addendum or answer it in a way that they will not perceive that risk is there. There are also questions they'll say, do you use this technology? It's a bad question because all I have to do is use it 1% and I can say yes. And other times they'll say, do you use this everywhere? Also a bad question because I can have it 99.9%, but I can't say 100%. So in one case, they're going to underrate the risk. In the other case, they're going to overrate the risk. So you need to have those good conversations. That's how I've helped customers earn substantial multi-million-dollar savings in their cyber insurance policies by anticipating how the broker, how the underwriter would look at these kinds of things.
Yep.
That is the role that a good CISO can do for any size organization. Anticipate the questions of your customers, right? They want to buy something from you. I just said when you're on the buy side, it's defensible if you make sure you ask them questions. Frankly, I think this has to happen on both sides. One of the frustrations that I have of many vendors is they'll say to me, you're the first time anybody's ever asked me these questions. I am? I don't think I want to do business with you. You're selling to a highly regulated market like financial services or nuke or healthcare. And you didn't anticipate that the buyer was going to have to ask you certain questions. You should come prepared with an answer and a treatise to give to me. Your job is to make it as easy as possible for me to do business with you. So if you're a CISO or if you're a small business owner and you don't have a CISO, at least anticipate the questions your customers are going to have. They're your customers. Make it as easy as possible for them. Because if you anticipated that question and had a document that answered it, even if it's not a perfect answer, even if you didn't address every question, the fact that you did that sets you apart. It shows that you were showing them a level of respect.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense.
That's just so obvious to me. And so many companies don't do that. The AI market is a prime example. I think many companies are relying on the fact that the company that sells them a product is going to want to put AI in that product so they can charge me more.
Right.
And it's the uptick in the price on the invoice is how I will learn about the advent of the AI capability. Well, what about the vendors that are just putting it in for free and plan to charge me more later? Do I know I just got an AI capability? Right? Especially
already inside the house. It's been running for 6 months.
Rule number one. Exactly.
We enable it by default. It's one of the frustrations I have, and this is almost, I'll describe again. I'm speaking from 20 years experience in the pre-sales industry, so anticipating, and I loved regulated industries because then it was the government who was the bad guy. It's not me who says you have to be HIPAA compliant.
100%.
I'm just the one who will cheerfully allow you to be HIPAA compliant. But we treated it as, we're all adversaries. None of us are working together. A lot of the big cyber companies are looking to just displace their competitors and so that you can buy into their ecosystem and stuff like that. And that's, let's displace the existing staff, let's displace the existing tools and get them into the Omni suite for cybersecurity package sort of thing. There's a lot of money to
So
be made in that, I guess, but it's also kind of
I'm not a fan of big or more regulation in most cases. I am a fan of anything that will save us collectively time and money.
right.
So for me to buy a product, I have to go and kick the tires on that vendor. Let's just say you have a similar need, right? The CISO function is obviously security is not a one size fits all, but a lot of the stuff is the same stuff everywhere,
A
right?
lot of people need front doors on their houses,
Right, exactly. When I evaluate that, why am I evaluating the security of that product? I shouldn't spend any time doing that. I need to evaluate for fit with my technical stack. Will this integrate with the other choices I've made? And I need to evaluate it for fit with my business needs. Will this do what we want and work with my culture? I shouldn't be evaluating it for how it protects data, right? When I buy a car, I don't have to crash test it myself. When you're buying that car, the vendor who makes that car didn't have to take another car and submit it for a crash test, right? They took one or two, whatever it is, and they send it to the NTSB and they do one test and they give it a rating. Now I can rely on that rating. Why aren't we? So this would be an example because you have to vet that and kick tires with that company. They don't want to have to go through that process every single time with every single customer. It is actually to everyone's. This is a win-win-win.
Yep.
Right? If we said this product is known good secure, by the way, any lawsuit that I might get hit with for buying that product, I would no longer have to worry about that issue because it was defensible because I relied on that. I'm not saying this has to be government backed. It could be industry, came together and said, this is how we're going to do it for our industry. Right.
Yeah.
But something like that, again, we can't afford to waste our precious time and our resources doing things that are not to our collective advantage. At some point, we're just going to have to figure that out.
Well, and because to your point, we have to realize that we're all on the same team because who knows they're all on the same team? The hackers.
100%.
They share data with each other cheerfully because they know that the more that they share, whereas we do in some cases the opposite, where if you have cybersecurity product X, well, their known data set is that's our data. You can't see that. That's how we make money. We monetize it in ways that, now we're not focused primarily, again, I'm a capitalist and it's been the best system we've tried so far, but it doesn't always produce perfect outcomes in some cases where we lose sight of the focus. Because again, this is we're all part of, we can't have one of the critical infrastructures fail and say, oh, it was just the ag space or it's just the water,
Just the
you don't
food.
need that. They're kind of critical. You can't knock out, it's, they all link to each other. And I fear that, and this is what kept me awake and frankly why I started my business was that we had become so comfortable living in a world where I can just go into my bathroom and turn a faucet and water will come out. It's clean. I can do that. For the vast majority of human existence, that is magic. We have magic now that we can just make clean water. We can go to a building where there will be fresh food that we can purchase and stuff like that through a card. Heck, we don't even have to go to the store. We have these little magic boxes that we can go to a thing called an app, and food will appear at our houses now. taking that away, that was the thing that scared me. It's almost like if we think about, try to take Gen Z's phones away from them and just watch what happens. Now, the older millennials like me it would suck, to be honest. But I could remember, like, what did we used to do? We used to play in the woods with a stick or something. We'll just do that. Whereas the other would be like shriveling up like Indiana Jones style, in the Ark of the Covenant because they've lost access to the internet. Like, it's an interesting time that we live in. Um, and actually, Jason, if you'll humor me, I mentioned one of the other things that we're trying to do with the HoCo Cyber Collective is again provide that educational thing specifically for again those older adults, the senior citizens, the baby boomers, frankly, that are sadly being targeted all too often. If I can share my screen real quick, this is something that I had an idea about. I think even during this call, we've made movie references and stuff like that where, let's see, can you see my screen? And is it a YouTube channel? Hold on, do you see
I'm still seeing the MITRE ATT&CK framework.
I showed, see people, even IT professionals don't know what the heck is going on. There we go. So this is the most recent one. So I'm making a series of videos that's using classic movie references to get across like a lesson. So let me just play one of these and see what you think of it. Hopefully this works.
In a city where shadows stretch longer than the truth, danger isn't always hiding in alleys. Sometimes it hides in your own name. Tonight's tale, the case of the stolen identity.
Boss, I got a problem, see? Somebody's been poking around in my accounts. They knew my birthday, my address, the works, like they was walking around wearing my skin.
Slow down, kid. That ain't voodoo. That's identity theft. Real smooth operators can grab your personal details and take you for a ride. Next thing you know, they're buying cars, taking loans, maybe even emptying your bank faster than a getaway car on wet pavement.
But how'd they get it, boss? I ain't exactly handing out my social on street corners.
Doesn't take much. A weak password, tossed receipt, or a bad click on a phony email. That's all it takes to turn your life into a dime store tragedy.
So what do I do, boss? How do I stop some Sharpie from walking around with my name?
You lock down your passwords tight. Don't recycle them. Shred papers with your info. And watch those credit reports like a hawk in the fog. Because once your name's out there, kid, it ain't just a name anymore. It's your whole life on the line.
In the city of shadows, there's no worse crime than stealing a man's name. Protect your identity, because once it's gone, it ain't easy to take back. Tune in next week for another Cybercrime Caper. Brought to you by the HoCo Cyber Collective.
What do you think?
Love it. The whole noir thing, the scratchy record. Dashiell Hammett would be proud.
Excellent. So I'm working on one that's a cheesy 1960s sci-fi, and the other two, it was another like a gangster thing, and then actually a Western was the tale of the ransomware wrestlers. So I'll send you a link to that. But
So relative to this one, I would take it. It made 3 recommendations, and I would make all 3 of them a little bit stronger. So the first one, you are going to have to give away your email address or your phone number or your credit card to do things online.
right.
That doesn't mean you have to give away your credit card, your email address, or your phone number, like I just said.
Right.
What do I mean? You can have a Gmail account, register a Gmail account in any name for free. I have a variety of fake persona that I maintain for online purposes. One of them is Stephen P. Amman, Amman is his last name. And if you put it together, SP Spam Man.
There you go.
So it's literally Spam Man. And whenever I am forced to register with an email address in order to get behind a paywall or get whatever I need, I have no intent. I don't check that account. There's nothing legitimate that comes to it. Folks, have more than one email account. One for your legitimate stuff. When your bank sends you a notice, it should go to your legitimate one. For everything else, let it go to your spam email account. So that's number one. Second, passwords. Yep, don't recycle them. Absolutely. Better still, if you are engaging a cloud-based service provider for any service and they do not offer you an MFA option, pick a different vendor. This is
Right.
2025. Everybody should at least offer the MFA.
Yeah.
Second, he said, monitor your credit report. Even better, depending on your situation, I have a freeze on my credit. I own my house. I've been here 28 years. I own my cars. If and when I decided to purchase a new car or buy another house, yeah, I would have to unfreeze my credit. But for 99% of the days that go by, there's no reason. So someone cannot open up credit in my name, even if they got to hold all the necessary information. And for the listeners here, this is an integrity issue. I don't know how we're going to do this. I don't think we have a good answer. There are databases of compromised information, all of the out of wallet questions that we are asked to answer. Which of these is a car you didn't own? Which one of these is an address where, all the Experian, the credit reporting, some of them have been compromised. Some of them actually accidentally, I hope accidentally, sold their data, because that's the business that they're in. They're a data broker. They've sold it to bad actors, right? People should be doing an ego search periodically. What can be found out about you, whether you use a service or you just use it yourself? Find out if there's something there that you don't want there. Take action to clean that stuff up. So those are the things that the very first, and then the other thing is, I think something happens as we age, literally to our brains. We become less cynical. A better way of saying it is more trusting, less gullible. I mean, more gullible. It's why grandma and grandpa are so much fun and mom and dad aren't, right?
Right.
But as you lose that, I'm not saying I want you to be paranoid, but you should have a healthy level of skepticism. I can remember some experiences from my own father, who was compromised more times than I care to admit. He was served papers online. I'm like, no, that's not a thing. You cannot be served. Processor must physically present and I think still touch you, but you can't serve you papers online. Nothing important is going to get delivered online. It's going to get delivered to your address of record via snail mail, still to this day, right? Why else are we killing so many trees with those financial statements that we all have to get from our, the prospectuses and all that other nonsense? So,
well, they regrow, but yeah, we live in interesting times. And, if you're looking to get into an industry, cybersecurity is certainly not a bad one to get into. My hope, as someone who is young adjacent, I'll say, that it is a solvable problem, that we can figure something out. I hope it is, because the alternative is unacceptable to me.
I don't think there's anything that we've talked about or even left unaddressed that is not solvable if we have the will.
Yeah,
like all. Everything else, it's a question of priorities and allocation of scarce resources. I believe that nothing, this is not hyperbole, this is me speaking personally, I believe nothing less than our nation's economy. I see this as a national security issue. If this were a kinetic war and not an online war, we would have already gone to war. We would have. I mean, if the behaviors that countries around the world are engaging in, we've already had a declaration.
Like firing tank shells or something into our territory. We would have not tolerated that sort of thing happening.
Yeah.
But it's a computer, so we treat it differently.
I don't want to get political with this. I think this survives any one administration, any one party. I'm hopeful that our leaders are at least asking these questions and having these conversations. Sometimes I'm concerned that where the line gets drawn is too much in favor of make the money, time to market, get it done, accept the risk, deal with it later. There is a lot of angst and doomsaying around the AI advancements that we're seeing. AI is a tool like anything else. I'm sure you could have said this about, it was going to be the end of the world when cars replaced horses, or, whatever the paradigm shift was. This one's a little different. And I'm not talking about super intelligence and having the machines take over. I'm not talking about this scenario. Is it a possibility? Sure. There's a lot of possibilities, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the more pragmatic things. MAGA was not a Trump-derived campaign slogan. That was a call for middle America that some of our politicians ignored to their own peril, and that Mr. Trump recognized and took advantage of as an astute politician. What did MAGA mean? It was, well, I'm sitting here in middle America and I can't go to work and have a good life because the factory that my father worked in and his father before him worked in is no longer here. Now, I'm admittedly oversimplifying this. So what did previous administrations say? Well, for 20 or 30 years, we've been saying to people, we're going to retrain you for the jobs in the information economy, right? We went from, an agrarian to an industrial to information, now information to a post, whatever we want to call this thing. Okay. Well, we know how well that worked. It didn't really work well for most people. It was too much of a shift. And to go back to school at age 48, not for everybody. So automation in the factories put people out of work. Mm-hmm. What's AI going to do? It's going to put a lot of people out of work. And some of the people that made the transition. Say that again?
Us white collar workers are going to have our time in the barrel, that the blue collar workers are going to be like, welcome. Sucks in here.
It's interesting because if my children are out in the real world and have chosen career paths, if they were still younger, I would say go into the trades, right? Go become a plumber. If you've ever done any work in your house with plumbing, you know that there's nothing, it's the worst named job ever because there is literally nothing that is plumb about plumbing infrastructure. and an AI isn't going to be able to figure out, where the pipe fitting that's coming out of the wall and the pipe fitting that goes into your sink or your toilet line up. They never line up. You gotta make a part that doesn't exist. Right, that's not a job that AI is good at.
It'd be worse. The AI would assert that it was lined up, and then when you pointed out that it clearly is not, it would apologize, and then
so here's where I'm going with this. I don't know that anybody's talking about this issue. There's people talking about all sorts of other good and bad, but the level of joblessness that this could create. Now, I've read science fiction books that have us as a species the idle class and the machines do everything for us. That is one possible future.
Yeah.
But hang on a second. Last time I checked, you said you were a capitalist. Our capitalist economy is based on one thing, which is our citizens' ability to consume. I don't mean a couple of mega billionaires buying some large yachts and planes. I'm talking about you and me buying something from Amazon every single day. And if you don't have a job, do we really think the country is going to have a universal basic income? I don't see that happen anytime soon.
No.
And the wealth that's going to be made with this, I don't know that that's going to be well decentralized and democratized. So how do we continue? That's the real question. How do we continue in a consumer-based economy in the face of AI putting certain jobs out of work? How do we make that transition? If we don't, this is gonna look like the weirdest version of Hunger Games.
So I'm sure, hopefully our corporate overlords at Disney don't come after me, but I think one of the depictions of what you have is like a WALL-E, where literally we're just plugged into. It's basically the Matrix outside of. We're not in tubes. We're sitting in chairs.
It's
And
funny.
we're
We
in
were
both
sitting around.
cases we're being fed through straws. Just the straws go into different orifices in different movies.
Oh man, I hope
Um,
it's not that. That's the Matrix. I mean, if you're just lying in a pod being fed, hopefully we're doing a little more with our lives than that.
well, I feel
But I
sometimes like
think there could
now.
be. I think there could be a dichotomy. There could be people that stay at home and order stuff, and then the other half of the world would be the people that bring stuff to the people that ordered it. At least until we get robots that are
Until
doing
we get
that.
robots that don't, as we saw in the documentary The Terminator, we know that this will end well for us because, yeah. But just like that in Wall-E at the end, I like that's actually one of my favorite movies because it does show a somewhat hopeful ending where the humans suddenly realize that they need to get out of their chairs and they don't like destroy the robots, they work with the robots, and they rebuild everything. So maybe that'll happen if we're again. I'm young adjacent. I have to be optimistic because the alternative isn't acceptable.
Well, I'm not young adjacent, and I have to be optimistic because the alternative is untenable.
Yes, I
Uh,
agree. And that's why it's a yin and yang. We have to do it. So, Jason, I really appreciate you being so generous with your time. Before we go, like, is there anything you want to leave us with, or, any last portents of doom that will keep the audience awake afterwards?
um, I
Reveal the
think
whole thing's been a deep fake.
no,
Ah!
right. No, I think it's literally up to all of us. And this isn't just a corporate thing. We all use technology. We all need to make good decisions. None of us would knowingly tolerate inferior products or services, right? We all give horrible Yelp reviews when we have that bad experience. We need to be more demanding, and demanding is a strong word, but if we are not asking for the companies that make our products and provide our services to give us a, I'm not going to use the word secure because I don't know what that means, but a risk balanced solution, right? When we're articulating our needs, we have to be more demanding. I'm going to call Microsoft out. There's a lot of people that you and I both know that would say Microsoft is the reason cyber professionals have a job, right? That it's one of the biggest viruses out there. Jokes aside, I remember I grew up, the Orange Book was part of the Rainbow series. I got my copy in 86, and it had a thing called, if you remember the Bell LaPadula model, really for your CISSP test takers, a reference monitor, right? That was a secure, trusted operating system. Microsoft came out with an operating system, was not a trusted operating system. And I'm not faulting them for that. That's not what we asked of them. That's not
Right.
what they sought to build. Had we, their customers, been more demanding of them or any other operating system manufacturer, we would have gotten a different product. And that's all I'm saying is if you don't like how things are, you have to be an advocate for change. And I'm not saying you have to go out there and protest and be, but ask. Again, if nobody's asking, nobody's going to be. What are the solutions that all of the big IT companies go after? Right? I'm going to build the thing that I want to sell a billion of. I mean, Steve Jobs didn't want to sell one iPod. He wanted to sell a billion of them. And people didn't even know they needed it. Now you can't imagine not having a music, device that you walk around with to play it all, right? So just ask for it. If you're not happy, ask for it. If they hear it from enough of us, eventually they're going to have to. And I think the good news is most of the time we have choice. If you don't like what you're getting from one vendor, vote with your feet and take it someplace else. They'll learn real quick.
Well, and that brings it to, I guess, the larger point is that no one's going to do it for us. We have to demand it. That's true basically with everything in life. You want government. Government is us. It's
Right,
not some alien
100%.
entity. It is us. And there are mechanisms by which they are frustrating and they do require highly focused collective action, which is not super easy to do. Although I will point out that now that we have computers, internet, and cell phones, such a large scale thing is a lot more reasonable. And actually, social media is showing us that, yeah, you can do some pretty impressive things for good or ill. Hopefully, enough of us choose good over those that choose ill, um, to just sort of get through this. because, we have to keep pushing. We have to hope, speaking as a father, it's for the next generation. Because it's unacceptable for it to not go any other way, sort of thing. I demand it.
And then one last thought, and I'll
Yeah.
take this back to the corporate side, because that last one was more about what can we all do as individuals. If you're the security person in a company, you've got to let everybody in that company know that you've got their back. You're not there to bust them. You're going to make a mistake. We're human. You make the same mistake 4 or 5 times, that's a very different conversation. But don't be afraid to bring something to me. I'll give you an example. 3 companies ago, I paid a firm to try to break in. As we all know, it's called a penetration test. But I also had them do social engineering, and I also had them try to physically get into the building. That building was had a front guard in the lobby that was not provided by me. That was provided by the building that we were in. Now, we were on, I don't know, 8 of 11 floors. We leased the vast majority of the building. The building had controls in the elevators and the doors and all this other stuff. But that first line of defense was that security guard. And I went to this person and all the other men and women that filled that role, and I would brief anybody new that the building would hire, and I made sure that they understood, I've got your back. I don't care if it's the president of this company that comes in here and says, I forgot my badge, and is threatening to fire them. If you know who I am, and it was like the more angry and yelling that somebody is at you, that is a red flag that tells you how wrong they are, how right you are, and however you want to phrase it. It's above your pay grade. Say it however you want. Get me on the phone. I've got your back. And they have to know that you will protect them, because otherwise they will fall prey and do the thing that the bad person wants them to do. And by following that, that's ironically what actually gets them into trouble. Right? They're doing it because they don't want to get into trouble, and that's what causes them to. So how do you avert that? Let them know that you've got their back. And if you can actually reward positive behavior rather than punishing, it's not that different from how, I got spanked a couple times. I remember but I burned a barn down. Okay, that was a little bit different. Yeah, did I deserve? Did I deserve a whooping in the woodshed? Yeah, absolutely. But for every infraction, no, because otherwise I knew that my parents had my back, and I could come to them, and they gave me some help. It's no different. Same idea.
Yeah, and for the people that are on the other side of that equation, just remember that if you're demanding that exceptions be made for you, the same can happen with someone that you don't want getting into that building. First off, don't be a jerk to the people that, I always found you can tell quite a bit about a person based on how they treat people they don't have to be nice to. It's actually one of the biggest things, like someone being rude to a waiter or something like that is like, well, what else do you do?
Right.
Sort of.
Right.
But no, that is important that, again, you have to have people's backs, because otherwise, if you can allow, in your example, a security guard to be browbeaten into allowing an unauthorized person in, that's bad. Because now there's a very easy way through, and some of those stated assumptions that you may have in your security plan are now not working. Sometimes our passwords, we just let them through anyway. You got it wrong 4 times, that's fine. You don't need to put your password in. Like, that would be insane. If you listen, people that are listening, don't do that. But no, I really enjoyed our conversation today. I think we should bring this to a close. But, Jason, thank you so much for your time. I hope everybody found this interesting. Again, Jason Taule is the CISO in residence at the Maryland Innovation Center. Again, just a shout out there. It's one of the selling points, frankly, to being a member, is to have access to finding
absolutely. If you're a small business and
oh my God, it allows me to punch way
benefit from
right.
We've got legal counsel, we've got sales pitch, we've got all the different components of starting up a small business. We've got respective EIRs. I'm just one that can help you out. Definitely check us out, Maryland Innovation Center in Columbia. And frankly, you should be expecting more of your incubator. If you're not getting these services, come over and check us out.
Here. Well, thanks everybody. I hope everyone found that interesting. And Jason, stay on. I'll sign off. But just thanks everyone for joining us for another episode of the HoCo Cyber Collective Podcast. Tune in next episode for another conversation. Thanks everybody.
Thank you for listening to the HoCo Cyber Collective Podcast. Stay connected, stay curious, and join us again for our next episode.
Brought to you by the HoCo Cyber Collective.